At the time this is being recorded, which is December of 2012, we are in the last stages of editing of a movie called Cities of Light right now, but it's a movie about Ananda. I know recordings like this go on for a long time, so this may be old news by the time some of you are looking at it. But I was reflecting about the Cities of Light movie and the impact that I believe it's going to have on Ananda and our work in the world, our perception of ourselves, many different aspects. The movie itself is less the point, but it was prompting me to think about the fact that over the 40-some years that I've been involved with Ananda, there have been many watershed moments, times when the direction of the community was shifted. Sometimes we were aware of the fact that it was being shifted, and sometimes the impact of what happened comes across more slowly. So far in our history, all of those watershed moments have been created by Swami Kriyananda. As long as he's with us, it's going to be his consciousness which is going to define things. After he passes, I believe that consciousness will be transferred to others and the creativity will go on. But the fact of the matter is, he's given us so much that we have hardly touched that I think it's going to be, truthfully, I think it'll be a full generation before new initiatives are needed. All we'll need to do is just go back and pick up all the dropped stitches, and by the time we manage to manifest all that he started and left for us to follow through on, I'm sure that a lifetime of devotees will have already been lived through. The reason I'm bringing this up in this context is this very phrase, superconscious living, was actually a specific course of training that Swamiji himself developed, and he developed it about 1979, I think was when he developed it. And it came out of a period of time right after the fire went through Ananda Village in 1976. And it had been 7 or 8 years of really hard scrabble labor to bring the community up to a certain level of development. And then a faulty spark arrestor on a county vehicle ignited a dry field at the end of several years of drought, and all that dried out fuel went into a big blaze, and it happened to be situated in such a way that it burned right up a hill, came right over the hill and burned down a great deal of what was then an Ananda community. Most of the homes in the community part of our land went to ash. The central buildings were not hurt, and the monastery wasn't hurt, and the meditation retreat was miles away. But it was a heck of a moment. And Swamiji's response to it, once literally the smoke cleared and the dust settled, was to go on a nationwide tour. Pretty much exactly the opposite of what you would think of doing in such a moment. You would think you have to hunker down and get your life back together. Well, his point of view was we have to get more energy. A certain amount of energy now has been transmuted by fire, so let's take the energy we have and let's see what we can do to expand it. So he went on 2 nationwide tours, one in the spring and one in the fall of the years that would be 1979, I presume that's when he did it. And at the end of that, let's see, I have all my numbers right. Oh, well, it doesn't really matter. This all happened between 78 and 80. It really doesn't make any difference when. But what that did for us is exactly what he intended for it to do. Us, when I use us, I use us kind of like a monarch refers to his whole country. He says we, the royal we. Mark Twain says the only people who can refer to themselves in the plural are crowned heads of state and people with tapeworms. Too ridiculous, but I couldn't miss the opportunity. But I always speak of we when I'm referring to any aspect of Ananda, because I feel like, truthfully, someone said once to me, you act like everything at Ananda is your responsibility. I said, well, isn't it? Certainly in the sense, everything about Ananda is my own. It's my family. It's my life's work. It's my guru's work. It's ours. So the effect on us was to get us to think beyond our borders, as simple as that, to see Ananda, to begin to see Ananda as a movement, as a way of living, not just as a place. Now, at the end of that cycle of time, Swami Kriyananda went to live in San Francisco for a time, and it led to the founding of Ananda House, which was our second actual urban center, but it was a bigger, more, just a more ambitious project than the first one, which was and is in Sacramento. And as part of that, Swamiji created this program he called Superconscious Living. And we had a several-month run-up to this big inaugural event, which was held at the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, which is a very classy venue. We had about almost 1,000 people there, which at that time was really a lot of people to come to any event that Ananda sponsored. Since then, in India and in Europe especially, and also some in America, we're able to pull that kind of a crowd in. But out of 1,000, only one seeks God, so you can see how many you have to reach to fill a hall. Well, coming back to this, talking about the initiatives that Swami Kriyananda has launched and that are just sort of sitting by the wayside to be picked up, Superconscious Living was one of them. It was and is an extremely interesting system for approaching the spiritual life, and in a way that can be applied to every aspect of a life. It's a unified theory of spiritual living. And the idea then of superconsciousness, and what I'm about to talk to tonight, comes out of that. I don't know if any of the recordings of that event of his are still accessible. It's actually an interesting question. I myself am intrigued. But really an entire mission can be made out of his Superconscious Living course, which is scarcely even talked about anymore, but it will be. I'm digressing, forgive me, I'm just in the mood to chat here. But I was talking to a friend recently about how people of expanded consciousness like Swamiji have a very different sense of time. My first perception of that was way back when I was in my early 20s, and I was just beginning to live at Ananda Village and just beginning to live with Swamiji, and he invited me and another woman over he asked us to help clean his house. It was just his way of having us around, which I was grateful for and I knew. And I was very orderly and buttoned down about everything I did at that time. I didn't really understand the concept of flow very well. And at that time, Swami Kriyananda was the only one in the entire Ananda world who ever gave Kriya initiation. He hadn't yet authorized any of the rest of us to do it. And as part of the Kriya initiation, he had this little brass bowl, and it had some red powder in it, kumkum powder, which he'd gotten in India, which is the powder that women use to mark the tilak in their, or put it in their hair. And he just kept it in an open little bowl. And I was cleaning everything up, and my way was I was really literally, I was about to move the powder into a jar. I was going to put a top on the jar. I was going to seal it. I was going to put a label on the jar. I was going to clean out the bowl. I was going to put it all away somewhere. Because he gave Kriya initiation, I believe, once a year. I don't think he gave it even twice. I think he gave it once a year. And somehow or another, he both intuited, and I think he could actually physically hear where I was in the house and what I was doing. And I had my hand on that little brass bowl, and he said, "Just leave that where it is. I'm using it." And I knew how often he used it, and I did know how often he used it. He had no other purpose. It was just for Kriya. Every 12 months he used it. And I was struck, even in the moment, oh, look at his sense of time, how different it is than mine. 12 months is a long time, and it's all these fragmented pieces, but for him, it was part of his flow to give Kriya initiation, and so that was something that he was always using. Being older now, just having the sheer number of years that have rolled past since then, of course, one's sense of time changes merely with how many years you've lived on this planet. But it was more than that for him. It was his consciousness. Now I'm going to shift slightly over into something else. When there's a story that's told about Master, and this all actually relates to our topic. You'll see. It's going to be sort of fun. Master was sitting once with Rajasi. This is a story Swami Kriyananda tells in The Path. That Master was sitting with Rajasi in a room at Mount Washington, And apparently Master had asked Oliver Rogers, who was one of the monks there, whose profession before he joined Mount Washington had been as a house painter. So he'd asked Oliver Rogers to paint that room because it was badly in need of painting. But Oliver hadn't even started. He hadn't even bought the paint. And Rajasi and Master were sitting in the room. Perhaps Oliver was there too. And Master, having asked Oliver to paint it, was the same to him as the whole thing being done, because Master just lived in the now. And so it was going to be painted, so past, present, and future all blended into one. And he turned to Rajasi and he said, "Isn't the room beautiful? And think, Oliver painted it all himself." And I think Oliver was standing there and he looked at Rajasi and Rajasi looked at him, and they looked at this clearly unpainted room, and then they just smiled. They didn't think that, Master was losing his mind or anything like that. He was living from a different dimension. In the world that Master lived in, it was painted. And with Swami Kriyananda, every time he writes a book or launches a new initiative, with great power and great emphasis, he declares what a transforming effect this is going to have, both on Ananda and on the planet and on Master's work. And we have to be very, very careful when you listen to someone like him talk, because we're very much accustomed to working with facts. And Swamiji is very much accustomed to working with magnetism. And we tend to think that things are accomplished by getting all the facts in a row. You have your business plan, you know exactly what you're going to do, you know what this year is, you know what next year is. And Swamiji understands that it's really the magnetism of something that makes everything else follow. And you can have all your facts in line, but if you don't have magnetism behind those facts, they won't attract or any energy to them. They'll just sit there as inert objects. What attracts energy is a magnetic flow of energy. And what attracts a magnetic flow of energy is the power of thought, the power of faith, the power of vision, the power of commitment. So every time Swamiji would offer us this powerful moving force of energy and invite us to become part of it. And I have to admit, it's been one of the many things as devotees that we've all had to learn, not merely in regard to Swami Kriyananda. I mean, in the early days of Ananda, we were all living with him in one small place, and so it was always a question of his thoughts and feelings. Now we're widely dispersed, but still, it's about understanding how magnetism works and committing yourself to it, and then the universe literally rearranges itself because of the power of your own force. Swamiji would often say when spiritual renewal could come around that, this year at Spiritual Renewal Week we'll have 250 visitors. And almost immediately, we'd all say, no. It was comical in retrospect. I don't think it was at all funny to him. I think it was horrible for him because he had to be so patient with us. And I recall I was off with him and we were traveling together and there was no one else around. And we were talking about prosperity. And I asked him, what is the secret of prosperity? Because people were searching around in many other writings looking for prosperity teachings. And I said, certainly Master has taught us how to be prosperous. So I said, the secret of prosperity is creativity. Just a one-word definition. Because the creativity that if this doesn't work, I'll try something else. And if that doesn't work, I'll try something else. And if that doesn't work, I'll try something else. And that creativity creates determination, creates magnetism, and then that magnetism eventually brings you success. And then Swami commented, because he knew perfectly well what was going on. He said, every year I say that we're going to have 250 visitors for Spiritual Renewal Week, and then everybody tells me, no, that we're going to have 35. And he said, but if I didn't say we were going to have 250, we wouldn't even have those 35. And it's what now, how this relates to what I'm talking about today is we're talking about superconsciousness, how to live superconsciously. Now already there's a nuance here that I'm going to have to define, but let me just back up for a moment and define our terms so we really know what we're talking about. Because this is one of the most useful concepts that we have on the spiritual path. Now I myself begin to laugh because I believe if we if there was such a thing as an audio search, and you search through just the seminars, the webinars I've given for these Ananda online classes, I wonder how many of them say, now this is the most important concept you can have on the spiritual path. Well, infinity in a grain of sand. It's center everywhere, circumference nowhere. That's what Master says, which is to say, at any point you can find everything. But this is one of the most useful concepts you can find on the spiritual path. I often do speak about the seminal truth, so I'm going to defend myself. And there's no competition here anyway. It's the most useful truth for you if you resonate with it. It's a useful truth. That's the certainty of it. Okay, let me deal with this. Now, in the Superconscious Living course, which is where I'm drawing these ideas from, and probably elsewhere, Swami wrote a book called Awaken to Superconsciousness, which is really a fabulous book of his, speaking of how many things are just lying by the side of the path, waiting for their destiny to be fulfilled. The book Awaken to Superconsciousness is definitely one of them. Swamiji has suggested many times that each one of his books should have its own ministry, have just individuals who dedicate themselves to the message of that book and creatively find outlets for the teachings that are there. Well, Awaken to Superconsciousness is one of those. But in any case, the way Swamiji has explained this, that we talk about 3 levels of consciousness. This is what Master says from the very beginning. The conscious level, the subconscious level, and the superconscious level. When I was really just starting on the spiritual path, like, let's see, I would have been 20 years old. It was before I even met Swamiji, or shortly after I met him. And I had a good friend, and he had a terrible affection for sleep. He could really sleep a lot, and he would use sleep. He didn't drink or use drugs or anything, so sleep was the way he would hide when he wanted to hide. And so he was very, very good at sleeping. And he used to justify it by saying, well, there's 3 levels of consciousness, and I have one of them down. I'm very good at one of them, you see, 1/3 of the way there. Of course, it was completely preposterous, but it made us laugh every time he said it. But we tend to think of the subconscious, conscious, and superconscious as if they were on a line, and first you're standing in subconscious, then you're standing in conscious, and then you're standing in superconscious, that it's linear, because we tend to think in linear terms. That's just what I was talking about Swamiji. We tend to line up all our facts and think that's how our things are done. We don't understand that the way we actually accomplish things is not in a straight line, but by moving closer and closer to the center. And the closer we get to the center, the more energy we can attract for what we're doing. And the closer we stand in the center, the more we can radiate magnetism in all directions. It's just a whole different reality than the reality that we think. This is the truth of this being an energy universe. There was a cartoon, one of those thoughtful cartoons in the New Yorker many years ago. And it was about Einstein's declaration, which became, the popular clarion call of Dwapara Yuga, that matter is an illusion, that behind apparent matter there is nothing but energy, that everything is energy, that matter is really only a vibration of energy. The implications of that, well, it changes everything. And slowly we're sort of coming into it without actually even thinking about it. It's just growing up around us. But this cartoon in the New Yorker, it was a street scene in New York, and you had all these different people. You had a mother with her baby, and you had the conductor of the street car, and you had the businessman, and you had the street sweeper, and all of them had paused thoughtfully in the midst of whatever mundane task they were doing. And then there was this quote from Einstein that was essentially this: mankind must gradually accustom himself to an energy concept of the universe. And you could see all the street sweeper gradually accustoming himself to an energy concept of the universe. You're like, what does this mean? Well, what this means is that magnetism is the key to everything, and that everything follows from magnetism, because if it's all energy, the magnetism that you're putting out is the defining reality. I'll come back to that more clearly in a few moments. But talking about subconscious, conscious, superconscious, a better way to think about it, well, not just better, but simply true, there's really 2 forces. which is the superconscious, is that aspect of our awareness which is expansive, which is creative, which is able to do new things in new ways, which moves with originality. And originality has a beautiful meaning that Swami has given it, which is not to do that which has never been done, but to do that which emanates from your own point of origin. You see, that's true originality. Many people try to be original, and they're not really original at all. They're merely reacting against, which means that you're completely defined by things that are external to yourself. Originality is when you are in the vibration of your own creation, of your own origin point, your own connection to the spirit, and that whatever you do emanates from that vibration. So the superconscious, the more we move into superconsciousness, the more we have moved out of the limited identity with this physical body, which is extremely transitory, and the ego that goes with it, and all of those likes and dislikes. And the more we're living in the pure flow of creative energy that emanates from, well, from the divine, from the source, however you want to define that source. And all the time, that superconscious dimension is calling us. And it's calling us because it's God Himself that's calling us. It's calling us, as we've often used the example, it's calling us like a river is called to the sea. The image of the river being called to the sea is such an extraordinary image, because even a river that is thousands of miles from the sea and is apparently in no relationship at all to the sea is nonetheless being called by the sea. And everything about the destiny of that river is defined entirely by the fact that it's being called to the sea. So it is with all of us. No matter what we think we're doing, really the one constant is that our individual spark of divinity is being called back into the infinite. And that's what superconsciousness is. In all the different ways it manifests, it's the part of us that is seeking an ever-expanded level of consciousness. So the qualities of superconsciousness are genuinely creative, not merely reactive creativity or imitative creativity, and I'll talk a little bit about the nature of that creativity also. The superconscious is the level in which all the seemingly separate elements begin to come into one. The image of the bicycle wheel, which is another favorite of mine that you often hear, but these work really well. I ride my bicycle every once in a while, and it has a rubber rim, and then all the spokes go into the center, and then there's a center point, and there's gears and so on. But the fact of the matter is, if you live on the rim, you're very separated from every other part of the rim. Standing on the rim, you have access to very little. As you move, if you move up the spokes toward the center, the more you get toward the center, the more your field of awareness expands, the more you can see, the more you can take in. Until finally, when you stand at the absolute center point of that wheel and all its spokes, every aspect of the rim is equidistant to you. You have access to everything at that point. That's the consciousness of a master. That's why Master standing there, the painted room was as close to him as the unpainted room, because he knew that the room would be painted, and it was just as real for him at that moment as the unpainted room, whereas others standing on the rim in the unpainted room only had access to the unpainted room. And so we think that's the facts of the matter. Swami Kriyananda stands there and he says, all these people are going to come to Spiritual Renewal Week because he sees Master's mission. He's been responsible for the manifestation of that legacy in this lifetime. Master, just as Swami has done, laid all these projects by the side of the path, and Swami's gone and picked them all up and brought them into manifestation. And he knows where it's going. He sees it, he feels it, he intuits it, it's been given to him by Master, and he stands in the center point, and all of those realities are equidistant from his consciousness, and he can declare all of them. And for him, you see, It's not even affirmation. It's just perception. And he declares it for our sake, for us to begin to shift and gradually accustom ourselves to this energy concept of the universe. And realize if we expand our awareness and stand in the reality that he's standing in, that not only can those things happen, but we can make them happen. Instead of just feeling sort of helpless on the side over and over again. Well, let's go back to Christ. Jesus said, "That which I do, ye shall do, and greater things." That wasn't like a compliment. That was a commission. Even more than that, that was a divine commandment to us. When Swami Kriyananda was growing up as a disciple with Paramhansa Yogananda, when Yogananda was still alive, Master often said to him, "You have a great work to do." And people, not understanding the context of that, at first when Swami would say that, people, let me put it this way, people seeing the world through their own lens, well, he shouldn't speak of that. That's just self-aggrandizement or self-delusion, or he's just making himself seem so important. Swami just sort of like looked at them when people would say that. Sir, that's not a very modest thing to say. He said, that wasn't a compliment. He said, that was a commission that he was giving me, because he added to it, and you'd better, and you mustn't disappoint me. This is something that you must do, this great work that you have to do. And what I was wanting to say there is that Master was also transferring to Swamiji the ability to do it. That's what Rajasi, Master's successor, said to Swamiji afterwards. After Master had died, Rajasi repeated Master's words. Master has given you a great work to do, Rajasi said to Swamiji. And then he added, and he will give you the strength to do it. Now, very interestingly, on one occasion, I think it was his 80th birthday actually, when we were having an extremely heartfelt celebration for Swamiji's birthday, and there were many hundreds of people there. And someone gave a little tribute to Swamiji, and he repeated Rajasi's words. Master has given me a great work to do, and Rajasi promised that Master would give me the strength to do it. And then he looked at all of us and he said, and you are the strength that Master promised me. Now, that's true to an extent, and it was also extremely sweet and gracious of Swamiji to say it, because we are all doing this together. But he also is trying to teach us, that which I do, ye shall do, and greater things. He's always talking about how you do this. There's no mystery about it. You just put your attention to the spiritual eye, you attune yourself to Master, and there it is. It just happens like that. You live superconsciously. You don't just live from the facts and the details. You move toward the center of the wheel, and then you have access to all of it. That's what the superconscious level is. Now, balanced against that, or I should say on the other side, is where we have the subconscious. And the subconscious is not, in psychology, in various schools of psychology, and Jung and others, they talk about the subconscious, and it's a little garbled up sometime with the superconscious. So try to put out of your mind whatever thoughts you have about what subconscious means, and just understand how it's meant in this context. Subconscious is basically everything that we've already done. It's the accumulated reality of what we are now and how we got here. In other words, there's nothing new in the subconscious, and this is where this definition of subconsciousness diverges a little from the way sometimes psychologists will talk about it. The subconscious is exactly like the memory system in a computer. I know nothing really about computers, so I hope that's the truth. What I mean is, I couldn't answer that question more deeply than that. But as I understand it, and I'm putting it this way, because all my computer literate people tell me that the computer is not conscious, it merely responds according to a logical pattern. And even if the pattern is undiscernible, when you trace it back, it was always cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. The computer never has an original idea. It only collects, reassembles, and presents again to you. Now, it can look really impressive if it's all rearranged, but it can only give you what you give it. Garbage in, garbage out is how they put it. The subconscious is exactly the same. It's not only all the memories of this lifetime, but it's all the accumulated impressions of all the lifetimes we've had until this point. It's everything that makes our vibration what it is in this moment. And there is a force, and you can call it the satanic force, you can call it the inertial force, you can call it anything, the karmic force, you can call it whatever you want. But whatever it is, it's a living power. It's not passive. It's a living power, and in this sense it diverges from a computer. Our subconscious is conscious. It's subconscious, but it's conscious because it exerts magnetism. You can think of it as a whirlpool, because it is a whirlpool. It's a whirlpool. It's the vrittis, the whirlpools of our vrittis, the whirlpools in the chakras. And the reason we call it a whirlpool is because it is, but also because that creates the picture of something that's dynamic and moving. And also we know if you have a whirlpool, you can get drawn into a whirlpool. And our consciousness can get drawn into the whirlpool of the subconsciousness. And what the subconscious wants us to do is hang out right where we are. It just wants everything to stay the same. The subconscious does not create new realities. It just keeps repeating the same old realities. And it's comfortable there. And the quality of the subconscious, where it's the superconscious, invites us to new, glorious, higher states of awareness, the subconscious says, oh, no, that's scary. Let's just stay with what we know. Let's just be comfortable. A couple of days ago, I had to pull an all-nighter, which is an odd thing. You know, we don't really pull all-nighters at my age much, but I partly had to pull it because my mind became so focused on the project I was working on. It was just pointless to lie in bed. I might as well sit at my desk and get something done. But the next day and the day after was a little rattled. And in the middle of the day, I had a Skype call with a friend. And she looks at me, she looks at her watch. It was 2 p.m. She said, "You're in your pajamas." Skype is really kind of deadly, a little bit, you know. And I looked at my little image. Yes, indeed, I am in my pajamas. And I said, and I would be holding a teddy bear if I had one right now. I said, I just came home and I needed comfort. And this was the best I could think of to do. Just change out of my clothes. And I was still working at my desk, but I was just wearing my pajamas. It made me laugh even at the time. But this sort of like this level of just like, I need comfort at this point. Now, sometimes we do need comfort, and we can't be fanatics about these things. That's why I just put on my pajamas and didn't even think about it when the Skype call came on. But that's what the subconscious tells us. Let's be comfortable. Don't strain yourself. That's kind of scary, isn't it? Let's just stay here. Now, the irony of it is an enormous amount of what the subconscious is calling, well, not an enormous amount, everything the subconscious mind is calling you to is not really going to deliver the promise. See, that's the folly of it, that we think, and this is the promise of subconsciousness, that low energy, the present state of awareness is preferable to the effort required and the potential downside of the unknown. When I counsel people, have counseled people over the years, and I've observed it in myself too, I've come up with a little principle which I call the preference for the known misery. And no matter how miserable the known misery is, at least it's familiar. And the preference for the known misery often feels more desirable to us than the risk involved in moving away from that for a better life that is not yet clearly perceived. So the subconscious mind just considers whatever is the known is preferable to the unknown. You see, this is the opposite of creativity. Now, it gets a little, I was going to talk about creativity now, but let me set the stage for that. The nature of subconsciousness also is that it diminishes our sense of identity. It limits our sense of identity, it's ego, to Well, ego is the infinite self, the jiva, the individual spark of divinity, which is us. Jiva is a Sanskrit word, but that's the right word for it. The jiva is that enduring individuality through all incarnations that is not defined by the body or the life that you live, but is literally the spark of divinity that is yours. When we used to be people would be very pretentious and not want to use the I pronoun, you would say this jiva, because it was the most impersonal way to refer to your individuality. This jiva is going to town for an ice cream cone, which is a little oxymoronic, but nonetheless, this jiva was going to town for an ice cream cone. But in any case, the jiva, let me just think where I was. Oh, yes. The jiva becomes identified with ego, which is identified with this one body, this one ephemeral experience, but begins to think that this ephemeral experience is who I am, this body, and then all the past incarnations that have influenced me to this point. We identify with them. And but by that very definition, here's what I'm trying to get to. The subconscious mind cuts us off from other people. The more we're identified and influenced by the subconscious, the more we live in a separate world of our own making. Now let's give the most exaggerated example, and you'll see what I mean. The subconscious is where we are when we sleep. When we go to sleep, we go into a subconscious world. Now yes, sometimes in your sleep, you pop into superconsciousness. But when you're in sleeping in subconsciousness and you have a subconscious dream, the nature of that dream is that it doesn't matter how many other people seem to be in that dream. You can be sleeping in a house with your whole family, you can be sleeping in a dormitory with your whole college class, and all of them can be in your dream, but none of them actually experience it except you. You're the only one. It's a completely private and isolated experience. The further and further you go into your subconscious dream, the more your experiences are defined only by your own reality. When people lose their mental balance and become, the word used to be always insane. I don't think people use that anymore, but just lose their mental balance and go into a world of their own making, they've gone deeper and deeper and deeper into a subconscious world until they don't even see what other people see. They see other individuals, they talk on the street with no one, to nobody who's there. They perceive that you're angry at them and that you're doing things to them, that the aliens are chasing them, and their fillings are a radio signal for for the CIA, all the different things that people do. And it's not really happening for anyone but them because they've gotten so deep into their subconscious that they have defined a reality that exists only for them. Now, when we come into the conscious level, I just want to try to think how to say this. We come into the conscious level. I'm going to skip that for just a minute. Let me just stay here for a moment. Oh, I know what I want to say about creativity. So a lot of people do artistic things that may even be attractive, but the more that creativity springs from the subconscious, the more individual it is and the less universal the vision. It may be a profound and deep experience for them, but the more it emanates from the subconscious, which is to say, it's rearranging their own life experiences, even in a way that is pretty, or even powerful, but the more the meaning of it is drawn only from that which is their own reality, the less universal the vibration, and the less enduring the art. Because only a few people who are on that same wavelength can see and feel it. And nowadays in art, people are deliberately subconscious. They're deliberately isolated in their own vision. I've actually seen occasionally on television or even in movies once in a while, you see popular singers singing with their eyes closed. And I thought to myself, wow, that is really like step by step by step, so that the singer is so like just concerned about their own vision and their own experience, that they don't even open their eyes to give their energy to the people around them. There was something that I saw, and I don't remember what it was. It was somebody very modern and somebody very classical. And the very modern person kept singing with their eyes closed, and the classical person was singing with their eyes open, and the difference was just stunning. It wasn't just the music, because I think somehow they were singing together. The details are obscure to me, but the image is not. That the person who was more in the classical bob was giving out all this energy to the audience. And the person who was just sitting there singing with their eyes closed, you could see that it was just their own private world. And maybe they'll entertain a few people who are in tune with that kind of reality, but that art will never last. The art that really lasts is the superconscious art, because when we move into the superconscious realm, you see, we're moving into the center of the wheel. And the more closer you are to the center of the wheel, the more everybody else, or at least a wider segment of the circumference, can also access, see, and feel connected to what you're doing. So superconscious art in any field has a vision that is close to the origin of everyone. And then everyone can resonate. It's not just a little piece of their circumference that you have to be standing there with them to be part of. They're close enough to the origin point that everybody can resonate with a piece of that. An interesting comment on that. Michael Jackson, of course, who later fell into disrepute before his passing, was, of course, for a time, stunningly popular across the world, one of the most popular performers of all time. The teenagers in our community at that time were quite shocked to realize that Swami Kriyananda did not only not know his name, he'd never heard any of his music, and they felt they had to rectify that. Now, Swamiji is nothing if not open-minded. So he, cheerfully accepted whatever recording they recommended was the quintessential Michael Jackson, and Swamiji listened to it. And afterwards, his comment was extremely interesting. He said, of course, I didn't like it, but that's beside the point. First, he said that Michael Jackson was a consummate artist, that he clearly knew exactly what he wanted to say, and he said it to perfection. And then he said, and what he had to say was exactly on the level of the mass consciousness of our planet at this time. And that's why he was so popular, that he wasn't taking anybody anywhere. He was speaking right exactly to where they were. So in that sense, you see, it's a little bit of a mixture, because his artistry was so inspired that you could see he himself was drawing an original flame, an original ray. But the vibration he chose to express was exactly where the planet was sitting at this point, and that's why the whole planet responded to him. Swamiji said, speaking of himself, he said that he's completely out of tune with the planet. And what he's doing is for the ages. He's laying the tracks for a direction people don't even know they want to go yet. I often say about Swamiji's work that, only a handful of people in the world care now. But as the years, and I dare say perhaps even the generations pass, as people gradually awaken to the ideals that he has expressed, they will turn back and realize that the pathway is laid out for them, that he's laid it out for us. And gradually, as according to Masters and Sri Yukteswar's statement that we're moving into Dwapara Yuga, that's where we're going. We're setting it up for the future. That's why Swamiji has been, so distressed by the direction that Self-Realization Fellowship, the organization Master founded, has taken, because the approach they've taken is what's sitting here right now, which is a sort of church-oriented, traditional monasticism, authority-based religion. And Swamiji is trying to create for where we're going, because he felt that's what Master came to do. Look at how the Master's lives really unfold. Jesus died on the cross, and he had a handful of disciples. But Jesus had planted a ray, into a superconscious ray, that people gradually have risen to. And so it is, I believe, of course, with Master and also with Swamiji and the work that he's done. So, on one hand, you have this superconscious unites us. And I was speaking of the conscious mind a moment ago, and now I'll go back to it. You have the subconscious on one side, you have the superconscious on the other. The conscious level doesn't really exist as a thing in itself. That's what's so interesting. It's the battleground between these two forces. It has characteristics, and we do define those characteristics. The conscious mind, tends to analyze. The conscious mind tends to look at the facts. We've moved enough out of subconsciousness that we can look at the world objectively. When we're in subconscious sleep, it's a universe unto ourselves. When we rise to the conscious level, there's a certain degree of shared reality. We can all sit in one room and have essentially the same experience. We can go to a play or a sporting event with hundreds or even thousands of other people, and we'll all basically see what's going on, and we can talk about it with each other, and we know what we're talking about. If I come and describe to you a dream I had, you have no independent experience of that. The only way you know is what I told you. But if we all do something together, we have a lot of independent experience. We all did essentially the same thing. Although fascinatingly, still we see that everybody individualizes it. We can't unify our perceptions completely. That's why we take notes at meetings and publish those meetings afterwards, those notes afterwards, because we all sat in the same room, but we didn't take away the same facts. The conscious mind analyzes things, describes it in a certain way, and then proceeds to try to act according to those facts. But the point I want to say here is that the conscious mind is not independent, because it's either going to be influenced by the superconscious to move into a more expansive view, or it's going to be trapped by the subconscious to just repeat what it already knows. I'm sure many of you have read the biography of Steve Jobs, and he's one of the most influential people of our times in terms of technology as a force moving us toward Dwapara Yuga. And one of the things that's commented about in his biography, he did almost no, or he did zero market research. Because he said, why should I ask people what they want? He said, they don't know what they want until I invent it. And it was just a completely superconscious attitude that he had. Of course, he had other subconscious characteristics, but nobody's purely one thing or another. In that respect, he was entirely superconscious. And Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi was one of the most influential books in his life, reputed to be the only book he had on his iPad, so they said. And in any case, because he knew that I'm not asking from the subconscious side what's already here, I'm asking from the superconscious side, where can we go from this point? And then he would get there by that, but not by analyzing facts, but by the knowingness that comes out of superconsciousness. Now, what we have to realize is that every decision we make, every thought we have, we're always leaning one way or another. We're leaning toward the habit of where things have always been, the idea that I'll find comfort in just sinking back into what's familiar to me, that less energy is more comfortable than more energy, that I prefer the known to the adventure of the unknown. Yogananda said many people, their lack of spiritual progress is because their lack of spiritual adventurousness. That's how he put it. I think that's such an interesting point, lack of spiritual adventurousness. That's what we have to think of. That's what it is to be superconscious. How much of what we think is true is just because we've always thought it was true. I watched a little girl once. It was just a silly example, but it was chilling, I think is the word I want to use, although it took place in a sauna. We were sitting in a sauna at some health club, I presume, or someplace where you end up in what's a rather intimate situation with total strangers. And so there was a woman there with her child, and the child was 9 or 10, and somehow or another the mother said something about, we were discussing, we were sitting in a hot tub, that was it. We were sitting in a hot tub, that's why it was a group. And the mother said, well, the hot tubs are nice, but I prefer the dry heat of a sauna. That was her phrase. I vividly remember it. The dry heat of a sauna. And so the little girl kind of looked around and looked at her mother and said, I prefer the dry heat of a sauna too, just like that. And you could just sort of see this commitment being planted in this girl's mind. And all of a sudden I just spun out into, she's with her teenage friends, and they say, oh, why don't we go so-and-so? So-and-so has a hot tub. Oh, I prefer the dry heat of a sauna, she says. And then she gets married, and her husband wants to put a hot tub in the backyard. And she says, oh, you're always doing what you want. I prefer the dry heat of a sauna. It was just frightening, really. Because, with all due respect, I don't think either the girl or her mother really lived an examined life, let's call it that. They just moved by the forces that were already there. And on the spiritual path, we just can't afford to do that. We have to always really be listening, and really be listening to not just how we feel about something. I had a very interesting experience once when Swamiji was counseling this man. He very strongly wanted to do something that from the outside was self-evidently not a good idea for him spiritually. But he was very strongly committed to it. And Swamiji was, Swamiji won't break down your defenses. If you put a wall up against his input, he's not going to fight you, because it won't do any good. It's not his position. People often really underestimate Swamiji, because if you're not magnetically inviting his consciousness, he won't force it on you. And sometimes people think that he should force it on me. I mean, it's a strange idea, but he should grapple with me. No, I don't think he will. If you have to attune yourself. This is where attunement comes from. Well, this man really wanted to do something. Swamiji was trying to help him understand that it would really be better at least to make an effort to resist this particular impulse. If he couldn't overcome it completely, at least he should resist it rather than embrace it. And then he said, well, why does it feel so right to me? And he wouldn't have understood, so Swamiji didn't really answer him completely. But after he left, I was talking to Swamiji. I said, I believe it feels so right to him because he's enclosed himself completely in his own reality. I didn't have the vocabulary of superconscious, subconscious at that time, but he's enclosed himself in his own reality. He's closed himself off from any contradictory input. So there's nobody in his consciousness but him. And naturally it feels quite comfortable. It feels even right. It even feels powerful because all his forces are gathered behind this single thought. So it was chilling and a salutary lesson for me that merely because it feels right, we have to also be very careful about what aspect of our inner reality is making it feel good. And I'm not trying to make you paranoid, but there is a razor's edge to intuition because we have many, many voices within us, and many of them are subconscious. And those subconscious voices will try to persuade our conscious mind with very good reasons why we ought to do this. But what we really want to listen to is we want to hear that intuition, which is really taking us beyond what we already know into a place that we're trying to go. This has to be applied with common sense. There's, common sense is part of this. This presupposes a certain psychological health. Webinars that I just gave recently about how to work with your emotions, the first and second one talked about that balance. So if that's an important issue for you, please listen to those, because I can't repeat it all here. I was talking to someone not too long ago, and they were talking about that for myself, I just had to do this somewhat selfish thing. I just had to do it because that's what I needed. And I was trying to rephrase the conversation so that the person could still declare that, but declare it in a way that was upward moving. And to say that, to call it a selfish action, but say, I'm not enough of a saint to be able to move beyond this. Because then at least someday I will be enough of a saint to move beyond this. Instead of thinking that what my subconscious is demanding of me is actually a good idea. It isn't a good idea, but that doesn't mean I have the power to transcend it yet. And then we always know where we stand. Otherwise, the subconscious takes us over and it persuades us that self-interest is really a good idea. Self-interest is always a bad idea. But sometimes we are not enough of a saint to transcend it. And this was the webinar that I just finished giving, so I don't want to give it all over again. But we have to be the apple tree. The seed grows into an apple tree stage by stage, and you can't skip any of the stages. So when the seed is just beginning to sprout, it's not yet going to bear apples. And the apples may be the generous fruit of your own consciousness at some later date, but right now you have to draw a little fence around yourself to keep the little sapling strong. Because if you push that little sapling farther than it can go, it's just going to, well, we had a phrase for it. We used to call it boing back yoga. That's just a made-up phrase. Don't take it very seriously. We used to have, as a child, I had this toy. It was one of my favorite toys. It was a paddle with an elastic string on it and a little rubber ball at the end, and you would whack it like that. And it was a pretty, loosey-goosey kind of rubber string, and you could send that rubber ball really far out, and then it would come whacking back. No matter how far you sent it out, it would always boing back. And when I began to watch myself and others on the spiritual path, I watched that some of us had a habit of practicing boing back yoga, that we could stretch ourselves way, way out there, but if it was not a supported kind of expansion, if it hadn't been built consciously and carefully with right attitude and right practices, that we could stretch ourselves way out there for a while, but inevitably we would boing back. And so I was supportive of my friend. You're right. Your present subconscious reality demands that you be contractive in this way. But you don't really have to be contractive in this way as a principle. It's that you're not yet enough of a saint to be able to follow your superconscious intuition in this case. Always, even when we're expressing limitation, as much as we can, try to keep our orientation toward the superconsciousness. And then the door is always open. Then at least we're not building up more of what we don't want to have. It's not that our present reality is cursed or anything like that. It's just not enough. We haven't reached the sea. We're rivers on the way to the sea. There's nothing at all wrong with what we are. The question is only, are you perfectly happy? Do you have a state of perfect bliss? And if you don't, then let's not hang out here any longer than we have to. Some popular teacher said if you defend your own limitations, the reward for doing that is you get to keep them. And that's not really a prize we really want to have. If we fight to be allowed to stay just as we are, why would we do that? Well, we do that because the conscious mind is the battleground. The subconscious tries to persuade us, stay with the known misery. The superconscious tells us everything that you seek is in this direction. That's why the Master talks to us that attunement is everything. Because you see, Master stands at the center of the wheel, at the peak of superconsciousness, and he's always pulling us toward him. And it becomes the subtlest kind of flow, where we just catch the wave, so to speak, and all of a sudden a certain perception of reality is possible to us. We're living in the conscious level, but we're perceiving through the lens of superconsciousness. Recently I was working on a writing project and I was just stuck. I knew that more was needed and I couldn't quite figure out how to get there, and I knew that, and so I declared the manuscript finished and I sent it to Swami Kriyananda. And as soon as he was looking at it, it was as if I could now see it through his eyes, which were far more elevated than my own, and that which I hadn't been able to perceive, I could suddenly see. It was just like I was lifted up. We were now both looking at the same thing, and I could feel it as he could feel it. And he had to guide me for a while, but then I caught the wave. I knew how to do it myself. Speaking of that, in the same way, it was writing, and I realized that my obstacle was subconscious, because I'd worked, it needed, a great deal of what I had written needed to be thrown away. It was perfectly good writing, but it didn't belong anymore. But I liked it. It It's just as simple as that. You know, when you do creative work, those are your children. Your creative deeds are your children. And you don't put your children out on the sidewalk. And sometimes, if you're doing artistic work, especially writing, which is the only work, the kind that I know, you just have to be ruthless. You know, you're good children, but you're not in my family anymore. You're out of my book. But extricating oneself from the subconscious comfort and really being able to just see it as it's trying to be. The conscious mind is the battleground. It's a great adventure. It's a great adventure. And the wonderful thing about it, it's step by step, it's increasing bliss. You don't have to wait till the whole thing is finished. Even just to move toward the sea gives us a liberating kind of joy that nothing else can offer. God bless you.